Tessa had never imagined she'd end up living in a tiny home. Yet here she was, tucked away in a cozy corner of the suburban sprawl, surrounded by towering trees and the comforting quiet of nature. The sleek, modern design of her little house on wheels wasn't just a practical decision, it was a symbol of freedom. No more of the suffocating corporate grind. No more overpriced apartments that barely fit a bed and a desk. She was living life on her own terms, and for the first time in years, it felt right. Her tiny home sat in a small, peaceful community that seemed perfect at first glance. Green lawns, tidy streets, and neighbors who smiled and waved. It was the kind of place where you could live without much hassle, where the HOA, Homeowners Association, kept things running smoothly. Or so she thought. The HOA, led by an overzealous group of residents who considered themselves the guardians of order, had rules for everything. From lawn maintenance to fence heights, nothing escaped their scrutiny. Tessa had heard whispers about them when she first moved in, but she'd been too caught up in the novelty of her new home to care. In her mind, it was just another group of people who liked to boss others around. But as long as her lawn was tidy and her tiny home fit the neighborhood's aesthetics, she figured they'd leave her alone. But then came the letter. Tessa had been sipping coffee by the window when she noticed it, the envelope sticking out of her mailbox like a red flag. It was from the HOA, stamped with bold black letters, "Urgent Notice." Her stomach sank as she tore it open, already dreading what she'd find. "Violation of community code," it read. "Your residence does not comply with our regulations regarding the size and nature of homes within the community. You are required to vacate the premises immediately." Tessa's eyes raced over the words again, unable to believe what she was reading. Vacate? The tiny home she had worked so hard to make her own, her sanctuary, was now under threat. Her heart thudded in her chest. How could this be happening? She leaned back in her chair, the words spinning in her mind. This wasn't just about the home. This was about something bigger, something the HOA wanted to control, and she wasn't going to let them take that from her without a fight. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her tiny home, Tessa realized this wasn't just a small dispute. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The tension in the air felt thick, like a storm was brewing on the horizon. She could feel it. Something was coming, and she had no idea how far it would go. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. The knock on the door was sharp, too sharp to be normal. Tessa had been expecting something after the letter, but not this. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the door to find a man standing there, wearing a crisp polo with the HOA's logo embroidered on the chest. His smile was polite, almost too polite, but his eyes told a different story. Cold? Detached? "Ms. Carmichael?" he asked, his voice a little too formal for her liking. "That's me," Tessa replied, trying to mask the unease in her voice. She crossed her arms, watching the man, trying to gauge his intentions. "I'm Mark Stevens, and I've been asked to deliver this to you." He handed her a thick envelope, the paper stiff and heavy in her hands. The logo of the HOA was printed, in bold, menacing letters across the top. Tessa took it, her fingers suddenly feeling numb. She wanted to say something, ask him why he was here, but the silence stretched out, thick with tension. "I'd advise you to read it carefully," Mark continued, his voice carrying an edge that wasn't there before. "This is your final warning." Final warning? Her mind raced. She tore open the envelope, the sound of the paper ripping like a distant gunshot. Her eyes darted over the contents, disbelief flooding her system. "Violation of community regulations," it began, the words hitting her like a slap. "Your residence is not in compliance with HOA standards. It does not meet the required minimum size for a permanent dwelling. You are hereby instructed to vacate the property within 30 days or face legal action. Tessa's vision blurred, her breath catching in her throat. 30 days? The tiny home that had been her sanctuary, the place she'd worked so hard to make. Hers. Now it was illegal? Eviction? You've got to be kidding me, she muttered under her breath, staring at the letter as if willing it to change. But no matter how hard she stared, the words remained the same. Mark stood there watching her with an air of detached satisfaction, as if he knew something she didn't. Is this a joke? Tessa finally managed, her voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and anger. I've done nothing wrong. This is my legal residence. Mark's expression didn't flicker. The HOA has made its decision. If you don't comply, we'll proceed with further action. Tessa's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to throw the letter in his face, but she couldn't. The calmness in his tone unnerved her, the underlying threat in every word. He's just the messenger, she told herself. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As Mark turned to leave, Tessa's mind raced. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't. They didn't know what they were dealing with. And the next move would be hers. But time was running out. The clock was ticking, and the fight was only just beginning. Tessa's fingers trembled as she clicked through the pages of her laptop, desperately trying to find something, anything, that would give her a fighting chance. The HOA's letter had made it clear. The clock was ticking. 30 days. She wasn't going to lose her home, not like this. Not to some group of self-appointed gatekeepers with too much power and not enough sense. Her eyes darted over legal, jargon, municipal codes, zoning laws, each term more confusing than the last. Tessa leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes, exhaustion creeping in. This wasn't the simple fight she'd imagined. This wasn't just about the HOA's unreasonable rules. It was about something far deeper, an entire system designed to crush the people who didn't fit into neat little boxes. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her friend Jenna, a lawyer she'd met years ago during a brief stint working in a corporate office. Jenna had always been there for her, and Tessa had a feeling she'd need her more than ever now. Got your back. Let's talk. Tessa quickly called her, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. Jenna picked up after a couple of rings, her voice steady but tinged with concern. Okay, Tessa. I looked into it. You're right. There's a chance, but it's going to be a fight. The HOA has more resources than you think. They're going to do everything they can to push you out. Tell me something I don't know, Tessa muttered, leaning forward, her heart racing. But what can I do? I've got to find a way to prove my tiny home is my legal residence. I've lived here for over a year. There's got to be something. You need to dig deeper, Jenna said, her voice quiet. Start with your property deeds. They should prove your residence status, and check the zoning ordinances for that area. If there's even a tiny loophole, use it. But be careful, Tessa. The HOA won't play fair. Tessa hung up, her mind spinning with new directions. The property deeds. Of course, she'd been so focused on the tiny house itself that she'd forgotten about the legal paperwork. But there was a catch. The HOA had already shown they were willing to bend the rules, twist the truth, and make life miserable. Could she trust that her evidence would even stand up in court? That doubt gnawed at her as she walked to her filing cabinet. The papers inside were stacked haphazardly, a mess of contracts, receipts, and bills. It took longer than she wanted to admit to find the deed for her land, but when she finally did, her pulse quickened. There it was, in black and white. She owned this land outright. But she wasn't the only one. The HOA had a deep history with the county, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. Suddenly the room seemed to close in on her. Her fingers hovered over the paper, the reality of what she was facing setting in. She had the legal ground, But would it be enough? A knock on the door shattered the silence, making Tessa jump. She froze. Not again. It couldn't be them. Not already. The knock came again, louder this time, punctuated by the sound of footsteps retreating down the porch steps before Tessa could even reach the door. She knew who it was. The HOA's latest move. Her heart raced, a knot tightening in her stomach. This wasn't just a polite warning anymore. It was war. Tessa threw open the door, her breath sharp in her chest. There stood two men in their mid-40s, both wearing dark sunglasses and stiff navy blue blazers with the HOA logo sewn over the breast. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and a grin that didn't reach his eyes, held a clipboard, flipping it over with deliberate slowness. "Ms. Carmichael," he said, his tone slick with mock civility. "I'm Greg Summers. We're here to do a routine inspection of your property. As per the letter we sent—" "Routine inspection?" Tessa's voice was icy, sharper than she intended. She stepped forward, blocking their way. "You've already sent me a letter. You've already threatened to evict me. What more do you need?" Greg's grin faltered, but only for a second. "You're in violation of HOA policy, Ms. Carmichael. This is not a negotiation. We're just making sure the facts are clear. We're just doing our job." Tessa felt her blood simmer. Her tiny home, her sanctuary, was now under siege, and these men were the foot soldiers. "You've already made your decision. I'm not leaving. I live here. I have every right to stay." Greg's partner, a shorter man with graying hair, stepped in. "That's the problem, isn't it?" His words cut through the air like a blade. "You think you have the right to stay, but you don't. You're in breach of zoning laws, and your residence is not suitable for this neighborhood. You'd better be ready for the consequences." Tessa's eyes narrowed. "What consequences?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Inside she was bracing for impact, but there was something in the air, a quiet tension that told her this wasn't just about paperwork anymore. These men were threatening more than eviction. Greg stepped closer, his voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "The HOA has deep pockets, Ms. Carmichael. We don't lose." The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. They weren't here to simply talk about rules. They were here to intimidate, to break her. "I'll see you in court," Tessa said, her voice cold as ice, though her hands shook at her sides. She wasn't backing down. But before they left, Greg handed her another letter. This one thick and stamped with an ominous seal. "Final warning," he said, his voice now laced with a challenge. "Next time, it won't be just a letter. The legal team is coming for you." As they walked away, Tessa stood in the doorway, the weight of their words sinking deep into her bones. She had no time to waste. They were escalating, and she knew, deep down, that the fight ahead would be much harder than she had imagined. This was no longer a battle for her home. It was a battle for her life. The air around her crackled, with uncertainty. The clock was ticking, and the HOA wasn't going to stop until she was gone. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across Tessa's small plot of land, as she sat hunched over her laptop, fingers tapping furiously on the keys. Her brain was scrambled, thoughts jumping from one potential solution to the next. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this fight with the HOA, something she wasn't seeing. The eviction threats, the escalating pressure, it all felt personal. She leaned back in her chair, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. What was the HOA really after? They couldn't possibly care about the size of her home this much. And if they did, why hadn't they acted sooner? Her eyes flicked to the folder beside her laptop, the pile of documents, photos, and notes she'd been compiling over the past few days. Every bit of evidence seemed to point toward the legal battle. Her deed, the zoning laws, court precedents. But it didn't feel like enough. There was a piece missing, a detail that could turn everything in her favor. A sudden thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. What if "They're not just trying to kick me out?" she muttered under her breath, eyes widening. She'd assumed their motivation was to remove her, pure and simple. But what if there was more? What if this wasn't about her at all? Tessa's pulse quickened. She quickly grabbed the HOA's previous letters, spreading them across the table. She reread the threats, the legal jargon, and then, there it was, in the fine print. A name she hadn't seen before. Fulton Investments. Fulton. The name rang a bell. She pulled up her phone and quickly searched the term. Her stomach dropped as the information appeared on the screen. Fulton Investments was a property development company with ties to several high-end housing projects in the area. They had a reputation for buying up land to build exclusive, gated communities. It was no secret they had been eyeing properties just like hers, properties that could be redeveloped into luxury homes. Her heart raced as the pieces started falling into place. The HOA, the looming pressure, the legal threats. It wasn't about the size of her tiny home. It was about her land. "They're trying to force me out so they can sell it," she whispered to herself, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. They want to build something bigger, something more expensive. The plot had thickened, but now the stakes were higher. The HOA wasn't just some faceless organization. It was a tool for a much bigger operation. Her blood ran cold. If she didn't act fast, she wouldn't just lose her tiny home, she'd lose everything. And she was certain the HOA wasn't going to stop. They had a plan, and they were willing to do whatever it took to execute it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Tessa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it them? Or was it something worse? One thing was certain. This was far from over. The night felt suffocating, every tick of the clock louder than the last. Tessa sat at her kitchen table, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. In front of her was a mess of legal documents, the chaos of them a physical manifestation of the storm brewing inside her. She had found the proof. The HOA's connection to Fulton Investments, the underhanded deals, the land grabs. But none of it mattered if she couldn't get it into a courtroom. Her fingers hovered over her phone as she scrolled through legal firms, each one more expensive than the last. "Can I even afford this fight?" she thought, the fear twisting like a knot in her stomach. It wasn't just about her tiny home anymore. It was about something bigger. Her life, her future, and everything she'd worked to build. The HOA had no intention of letting her keep her land. They wanted it for something much more lucrative. She tapped the number for a firm she'd heard good things about. The lawyer's name standing out on the screen. Nathan Rivera. He'd been involved in several high-profile cases involving land rights. Maybe, just maybe, he was the one who could help her take them down. After 2 rings, a calm but authoritative voice answered. "Nathan Rivera." Tessa inhaled sharply, her thoughts racing. "Mr. Rivera, my name is Tessa Carmichael. I need help. The HOA is trying to evict me from my property, but it's not just about my tiny home. They're connected to a development company, and I think they're trying to force me out for my land. I need legal representation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Rivera's voice softened, just slightly. "You've done your homework. What exactly do you want from me?" Tessa clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling up. "I want to fight them. I want to stay in my home, but I also need to make sure they never get away with this. I'm willing to go all the way, even if it means taking this to court." His response was steady, professional. "I'm going to need everything. Documents, proof, any communications you have with the HOA. It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap. But if you're serious about this, I'll help you. We'll hit them where it hurts." Tessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. "I can do this. I'm not alone." After the call ended, she sat there for a moment staring at her laptop, her mind running through the next steps. She wasn't just going to sit back and wait for the HOA to take her home. No. She was going to fight for it. But as she began pulling together the documents she'd need for her case, a familiar chill crept up her spine. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing in her doorway. Was it them? Her phone buzzed again, cutting through the silence. A message. It was from an unknown number. I wouldn't start digging if I were you. There are things you don't know about this fight. Things you won't be able to stop. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. Whoever this was, they knew far too much. And they were warning her. Her pulse quickened. This was just the beginning. The air in the courtroom felt thick, oppressive, charged with the weight of something much bigger than just a property dispute. Tessa sat in the plaintiff's chair, her palms clammy on the polished wood of the table. Across from her, the HOA's legal team sat with practiced poise, their eyes cold and calculating. The tension was palpable, every person in the room feeling the undercurrent of the battle about to unfold. Tessa's lawyer, Nathan Rivera, leaned in, his voice low but confident. "Just follow my lead," he murmured. "Stay calm, stay focused. We've got this." But Tessa wasn't sure. Not yet. She had spent weeks preparing, gathering every shred of evidence, every document, every email to build her case. But the truth felt like a distant whisper against the roaring tide of the HOA's power. Judge Williams, an elderly man with a stern face, called the court to order. His gavel struck, silencing the room. "Let's begin," he said, eyes flicking between the two sides. The HOA's attorney, a sharp-dressed man with a calculated smile, stood first. He launched into a smooth, rehearsed argument, painting Tessa as a rebellious homeowner who refused to follow the rules. He spoke of her tiny home as an eyesore, an illegal structure on prime land. Tessa's stomach twisted as he listed zoning, laws she had long since memorized, her mind racing for any way to fight back. But then Nathan stood. The moment felt like the calm before a storm. He approached the judge, his steps measured, deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We are not here to discuss a simple dispute over size or aesthetics. We are here because my client, Ms. Tessa Carmichael, is being wrongfully targeted by an HOA with ulterior motives." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. This is it, she thought. Time to show them. Nathan turned and gestured to the screen behind him, where a series of documents appeared. "I would like to submit into evidence the connection between the HOA and Fulton Investments, a development company that, as we know, has been attempting to acquire property in this very neighborhood." The room fell silent. Tessa saw the sharp intake of breath from the HOA's lawyer. This was the evidence she had uncovered, the smoking gun she needed. "Your Honor, this is the real reason for the eviction threats," Nathan continued, his voice steady. "They're not concerned about the size of Ms. Carmichael's home. They want her land." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The HOA's lawyer tried to recover, his voice now strained as he dismissed the evidence as irrelevant. But Nathan wasn't done. He leaned forward. "I also have a witness, a resident from this community, someone who's seen the negotiations between the HOA and Fulton Investments firsthand." Tessa's heart pounded. She hadn't expected this twist. Her witness, an elderly neighbor who had been too afraid to come forward at first, had just agreed to testify. The judge motioned for the witness to be brought forward. As the door opened, a figure stepped into the courtroom, someone Tessa didn't expect to see. It was Greg Summers, the man from the HOA's field team. He stood frozen at the door, a look of disbelief plastered across his face. Tessa's blood ran cold. This was a turn she hadn't prepared for. "Your Honor," Nathan said, his voice laced with calm resolve. "It seems Mr. Summers has more to say than he's letting on." The courtroom buzzed with an electric tension that seemed to pulse through the air as Greg Summers stood frozen in the doorway. Tessa's mind raced, her heart hammering in her chest. She had expected a few twists in this case, but not this. "Not him. Mr. Summers," Nathan called, his voice cutting through the murmur of the room like a knife. "Perhaps you can explain to the court why you've been present in every meeting between the HOA and Fulton Investments?" Greg shifted, his eyes darting nervously between Nathan, Tessa, and the judge. For a split second, Tessa saw a flash of guilt cross his face, a crack in the facade that had held for so long. The judge, who had been silent throughout, motioned for Greg to approach the witness stand. "Mr. Summers, you're on the record. Now, tell us what you know." Greg stepped forward hesitantly, and the atmosphere in the room turned colder. The sharp click of his shoes against the floor echoed like a ticking clock. His voice faltered as he finally spoke. I was just following orders," he muttered, his hands shaking slightly as he placed them on the stand. "The HOA, they were pressuring me. They said if I didn't help with the eviction of Ms. Carmichael, I'd lose my job. I didn't think—" Nathan interrupted, leaning forward with a predatory precision. "Did you know that the HOA, under the guise of wanting to remove a small, illegal structure, was actually working with a development company to seize land?" "Your land?" Greg hesitated, his eyes flicking to the attorneys sitting behind the HOA's table. The HOA's lawyer shot him a warning glance, but Greg wasn't listening anymore. "Yes," he admitted in a low voice, the truth slipping out. "I knew. I was told it was for a bigger project. They didn't want anyone standing in the way." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words sinking into everyone like a stone dropped into still water. The judge's face remained unreadable, but Tessa could feel the shift in the room, like the earth itself had just given way. Nathan turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this is the proof we've been looking for. The HOA, under false pretenses, has been targeting my client to clear the way for a real estate venture. This case is no longer about a tiny home. It's about greed and manipulation." The judge adjusted his glasses and looked between the two sides. For what felt like an eternity, he said nothing. The suspense in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally he spoke. "The court finds in favor of the defendant, Ms. Tessa Carmichael. The eviction order is hereby revoked. You have every right to remain on your property." A wave of relief washed over Tessa, so powerful that it nearly brought her to her knees. The fight, the sleepless nights, the stress, it was all worth it. She had won. The HOA's lawyer sat stiffly, his face a mask of frustration and disbelief. The members of the HOA, who had been watching from the back, exchanged furtive glances, no doubt reeling from the sudden loss. Tessa turned to Nathan, her heart still racing. "We did it." Nathan smiled, but there was something in his eyes. Pride. Yes, but also a quiet satisfaction. "You did it, Tessa. You stood your ground." Outside the courtroom, the world seemed brighter, lighter, as if the weight of the last few months had been lifted off her shoulders. She had been right to trust herself, to keep fighting even when the odds seemed stacked against her. As Tessa stepped into the sunlight, her tiny home, once a symbol of uncertainty and fear, now felt like a fortress, a place where justice had prevailed. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be people like the HOA, trying to push others around to take what wasn't theirs. But for now, she could breathe. She had won. And for the first time in a long time, Tessa allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.